Narendra Modi has delivered his much-anticipated speech. A lot of applause. Many questions still remain unanswered, but we've got our expert panel here to dissect that speech and also decide on the way forward. I'm going to begin with Professor Devroy here, Sanjay Nair, Rajiv Lal, and Mr. joins us. If I may begin with you, what did you make of the speech? Because this wasn't ephemeral stuff that he spoke about. He touched upon practically every sector, right down to education and health as well.
I think the way it's building up is he's incrementally adding up to whatever he wants to describe as his plan of action. Today it wasn't complete. I don't think it was intended that way, but we are getting little bits and pieces as we go along.
Is corporate India beginning to make sense of what Narendra Modi's economic agenda is? It's not just bullet trains, he's also talking about health. What are you making of economic agendas that everybody seems to be speaking of in this political season? Is there more confidence in the economic agenda that's been spoken about? Because like Mr. Jaitley said earlier today, this is the first time we're going into elections with economy and economics dominating so many headlines.
Well, I don't know what corporate India is seeing, but at least whatever I've picked up both in today's session and some of the earlier discussions, I think clearly where we are today, we need, as I said, not something which is dramatically different or rocket science, but need good execution. And the impression I got today was that, the level of detail with which he was focusing on so many things, I suppose the intent to execute and the conviction and the determination is there. What I was also impressed about, frankly, is that he's peppered it a lot with focus on technology and focus on an attitude to work together with all the state governments. Because, from our point of view, you can call it corporate India or whatever, the fact is that we need things to happen on the ground, and regularly you find they get stuck between the center and the state. So a couple of good things that I at least picked up was that there is that whole attitude to make things happen, make it happen collectively. But, I think the jury's out. We see, when it all happens there.
We'll see by the end of May what happens and what India decides in favor of. But Dr. Lal, if I may come to your sector, infrastructure is something that everybody seems to be talking about. Plenty of emphasis being laid both by Chidambaram and here Mr. Modi himself. Let me ask you this question. Is there a sense in the political class that we cannot move forward if growth is not priority number one? You heard a public speech here, but you do interact with politicians across the spectrum, offline, off camera. Is there a consensus in the political class that we have to make growth priority? We cannot get ahead otherwise.
I think it's an issue of emphasis. What I see happening in the political debate as we build up to the election is actually two distinct philosophies being more clearly articulated. With the Congress party, with its track record, focusing much more on inclusion, whereas for the BJP, it seems that growth is clearly the path to inclusion. So it's an important nuance, but more important so what I got from the speech today was a clearer articulation of that priority.
Right.
Second, what I got very important was a coherent vision of his approach to economic policy making. Two things I heard, which are quite distinct. First is cooperation and collaboration with the states. He made a very important and interesting comment. He's saying the Prime Minister's cabinet in Delhi is not a complete team. It's the Prime Minister that has to work with Chief Ministers. Very important statement. Second important statement he made, you can dismiss it as vision, but I think it's important. He wants to he has a vision for creating development or making development into a movement. Not something that is driven formulaically down by intellectual policy making. Two important points.
That's a fair point, and I think a lot of applause did come in when he said the Prime Minister and his cabinet is not a team, it's the Prime Minister and the Chief Ministers. If I may ask you, you've been a part of policy making, have done a whole host of things throughout your career. Is this utopic? Can this ever be a reality? Because there is politics that we live with, and we've seen the most bitter political logjam happen in the last 5 years. What's your view on that?
Yeah, let me start by saying, I think today's speech was far less political and much more on economic. It had much more economic content. I would say much more content.
Right.
Because he went to several issues, including social. Second, I think he talked at length about renewable energy. Energy security, when he was talking about, you could see, based on his experience of Gujarat, where he's been able to make a success of solar power, he expounded at some length how India could become more secure in energy, and of course, apart from renewables, he emphasized energy conservation or energy efficiency. But equally important is what I'm getting at. He talked about India has now to take cognizance of the rest of the world. It cannot possibly live by itself as a cocoon. Globalization is there, and all our actions have to be effective and impact the global environment. And there the example which he gave of what could be India's biggest export of teachers. He talked about our ability to, we have the demography, we have issues, as he talked about other Ds, that some of those could be clearly turned into advantage for the rest of the world. And in that, the allusion, or what he alluded to as our exporting teachers, I thought was a very novel thing.
Fair point. Professor Debra, if I may come to you, Narendra Modi is the poster boy of development and growth. He's really put growth, development back in the focus. The reason why we are debating this is because it is an electoral issue. Why is it so then that his party has this irrational opposition to something like FDI and multi-brand retail? Are we going to be dealing with two things here? Narendra Modi, who stands for reforms, development, growth, and then his party which constantly wants to pull in the other direction almost, it seems.
I cannot venture to answer on behalf of the BJP.
Sure, yeah.
I'm not a spokesperson for the BJP. Nor have I seen the economic manifesto yet. I suspect it's not out. My reaction would be that a lot of parties say a lot of things in manifestos. A lot of parties say a lot of things when they are in opposition. When they are in government, they sometimes do something that's completely different. So one need not take any public posturing by any political party as long as it is in opposition too seriously. Coming back to Mr. Modi's thing, I would endorse what Rajiv said, that this is the first time I have heard him so strongly in favor of decentralization in a union and state sense. He's mentioned it tangentially earlier, but that's been more in terms of the centrally sponsored schemes. To add to what Ajay Dua said, in this kind of polity, this is absolutely essential, and what we are talking about, can it be done? Of course it can be done. What we are talking about is the NDC. We are talking about the Planning Commission. We are talking about the Finance Commission. We are talking about the Interstate Council. All of these are constitutional organs which have collapsed, and indeed they need rehabilitation. The other thing that I heard, except he's not an economist, so he didn't use those words, but implicitly it was there, that for the growth you need the land, the natural resources, the labor, the capital and the productivity. How else are you going to get the growth?
And I'm going to ask you because, your clients, your people constantly say that when you speak to them in person, we seem to be veering towards being an over-regulated market. We almost seem to be wary of the foreign capital that's coming in, about foreign companies that are setting up. There is this sense of suspicion all the time in the minds of policymakers. Do you think some of that concern has been addressed today? Because he said there are so many laws that are being made. Two questions there. Are we over-regulated? And can we do anything about that?
I think we're definitely over-regulated. And he did make a very clear comment about that we have such archaic rules and regulations that we haven't even looked at them for years and years. But, again, I want to just bring a balancing factor to all this, that there are just so many priorities I heard today. He'd have really prioritized the priorities to get these things done. We've talked from renewable energy to, harnessing the strength of the teachers and what all the country can do. And I think all of them make imminent sense. They all look like really low-hanging fruits. I think that he's got some fantastic ideas.
The devil's advocate for a moment. Everybody is talking about as if we are standing in doomsday and we're going to crash thereafter. But if you actually look at the macroeconomic situation, growth is beginning to pick up a little. Inflation is beginning to taper. Deficits have been controlled. We can debate another day whether the quality of that control is something that impresses you. But do you believe the incoming government is going to be better prepared to deal with the crisis that we are facing right now, simply because of the decisions that have been taken in the last 6 odd months. They may have not borne fruits. The Congress party will perhaps pay a price for that. But do you think the incoming government is going to be far more apt and will be far better prepared to deal with this? Is there a platform that has been created, so to say?
So, 2 comments. One is, I'm not one of those that subscribes to the view that it is doomsday.
Okay.
And for some of us it seems that way, but there's a lot that is going right in the country for a lot of people who have never had opportunities. So that's why if you go into travel deep into rural India, you will find a very different set of concerns than what is normally aired on programs such as these. But to your question, there is, irrespective of any government, and notwithstanding, arguably the weakening of our institutions and our politicization of bureaucracy, the slowdown in decision making in bureaucracy that you hear. Nevertheless, and I can say from infrastructure's experience, there have been a number of what I call techno-bureaucratic initiatives that have been ongoing for a time to solve some of the real thorny problems. There are very complex legal, contractual issues that have come in the way of tariff setting, for example, for long-term contracts that are now broken. All that takes a long time to fix. That momentum is carrying forward, and no doubt will benefit the new government.
I'm going to touch upon inflation in a larger perspective, but I have a specific question for you. Because you've been a part of decision making in the government, how difficult is it to make decisions today? We are making decisions in full public square. Here you have Arvind Kejriwal who comes and questions the policy that the cabinet has passed twice. He is willing to take on the mightiest of India Inc. He has made gas policy an electoral issue. How tough is it then to make these decisions? Because you never know what and who can question them.
Let me put it this way. Strong leaders are known to take decisions sometimes oblivious to how those would be received immediately. As long as there is a purpose, there is a roadmap, I think decisions, even if in the short run they tend to be unpopular, probably could be taken by leadership which has confidence and which has the experience of having delivered elsewhere in the country for a fairly long length of time through decision making, strong decision making. That's what people are hoping that would deliver. Every decision may not be right, but certainly it would. The process, what people are expecting is that in case he comes, that there will be decisiveness in public policy. Some things may go wrong, something may be right, but at the same time, as long as he knows where he's getting, people have confidence that probably it will be ultimately achieved. So that's the examples which you talked about, gas pricing, etc. I don't think he would have applied his mind as of now on any of those issues.
I wonder how he hasn't, because he's been publicly questioned to clarify his stance. I'm going to come to you, Professor Devroy, and just to take a cue from there, whether he's applied his mind or not is only something that Mr. Modi and his advisors know. But he's been publicly questioned on a particular issue. We have an Arvind Kejriwal and Anna Hazare. We have a very different dynamic happening in Indian politics. Anybody can actually get up and question anything today. You just need to call a press conference. There'll be some of us who'll go there, and a decision can be questioned. How easy will it be for Mr. Modi to replicate the decisive, strong government Gujarat model at a national scenario which is very different?
You can't expect a binary answer in terms of yes and no.
Right.
My personal diagnosis, and we've spoken about it in the past, is that a lot of the slowdown in the recent past has been because of a decision-making collapse, which is administrative, and Ajay also mentioned that. So far as that is concerned, it's not about Mr. Modi. Anyone who actually takes decisions will be able to improve things and will be able to take it up not from 4.5 to 9%, but certainly 6.5% to thereabouts. You're making a broader point that in this climate of countervailing pressure, scrutiny, RTI, corruption, scams, all of that, is it going to be easy to take decisions? No, I think it will be a little more difficult than it was the case earlier, but if you're going to be transparent about it, I don't think you've got anything to fear. What does cause me some disturbance at a personal level, and again this is not about Mr. Modi, I have no problems with people questioning things within the framework of the Constitution. The trouble, of course, is some elements of this movement have effectively begun to question rule of law and the edifice of the Constitution. That, I think, is extremely dangerous.
Is that something that's worrying investors who look at the India story? We have the demographic dividend, we have the numbers, we can give you the returns, but hey what, we fail to seem to get our house in order.
Look, I think investors and CEOs of large organizations who invest in India and look forward to investing in it,
right,
I think they're all in a wait and watch mode. Now one can wonder why they're in wait and watch mode. I think they just do feel that some of the issues have just dragged on for too long. There has been no action. There have been a few of these retroactive discussions which frankly both sides have sort of good reason to argue. I think just indecisiveness and inaction does lead people to wait and watch. So I think the honest answer is that investors would welcome decision making, which I think even this government, as things stand today, has taken a lot more action. And I think, as one of my colleagues said here, that some of the techno-bureaucratic decisions that have been taken have actually speeded up a few things. So it just boils down to having some decision-making action. I'm sure we'll get 2 things wrong out of 10, but that's not the end of the world.
Get those 8
We've
right.
got to get them right.
6.6 lakh crore worth of projects that have been cleared. Not a single penny breaking ground other than the PSUs who are actually being coaxed to either do away with the PSU dividends or to make investments. Are investors holding back because of elections, or are they holding back because there is this huge trust deficit, not just between India and Indian government, but also between the central leadership and the state governments that become very, very active when clearances are concerned?
Yeah, investors get very shy once they've been burnt. And it takes a long time to restore confidence. Confidence is so critical to all these decisions. As Mr. Modi was arguing today, that people seem to have lost faith in the trustee nature of government. Restoring that is not an easy business.
Right.
I mean, you heard the example of Vodafone and one of the panels today, and how retroactive taxation has set back perceptions of India many, many years. How do you build that trust back? It'll take time. I mean, I don't think even Mr. Modi has a magic wand for that. People will wait to see their actions. First of all, they're looking for signs of stability, decisiveness. So a strong government is going to be very important for markets and investors. Second, they'll have to give it time. Are now policies that are made going to be stable, or is there some risk of reversal?
I'm going to turn this debate to inflation because I think Mr. Modi thrice in his address spoke about high interest rates. So it's obviously bothering everybody around the table. Let me ask you, this whole high inflation versus high interest rate debate, the RBI now looking to target inflation, make CPI the nominal anchor. Where do things stand really? Is that going to be the biggest point of concern? We are all obsessed about growth. Everybody turns around and says India is a nation obsessed about growth, rightly so. But what about inflation? Are we kind of, because it has subsided a little, are we not over-obsessed about it?
Look, inflation is a serious issue. The problem is, and I hope Rajiv contradicts me on this one, the problem is I have no idea what you do about inflation, except the supply-side adjustments. Let's leave out the imported part of it. If you leave out the imported part of it, whether it's manufactured or whether it's agro, it's essentially the supply-side adjustments. Beyond that, I have no idea what you do, and certainly you do not tighten up interest rates. Doesn't help.
Right. That's a fair point. You want to come in on that?
I don't know if you noticed, but throughout his speech, he never once mentioned inflation.
Yes, he did not.
Presumably, I don't know what went into the making of the speech, but I'm guessing.
But he mentioned high interest rates.
They realize that it's not just a matter of cutting interest rates or raising interest rates that's going to solve inflation. These are complex supply-related problems that will take time to solve. He didn't want to raise expectations about his ability to magically reduce price pressure.
The only thing is, the only thing is, in an earlier speech he talked about a price stabilization fund, and today I think he very quickly mentioned something like a food grid. He's talked about that earlier.
Yeah, but he didn't dwell too much into inflation. That was surprising because that has really drubbed the Congress and State Assembly election.
He's probably aware that things are not going to change overnight. FDI is not going to jump leaps and bounds as soon as the government changes. Investors are going to take time to decide. Similarly, the rates of growth, and if you are going to take time to step up. When did we have the lowest rate of growth? At a time when we had the maximum rate, just about, with a little bit of a kind of a gap. I would think that once we start having high rates of growth, it's a cause and effect. How do you get them unless the interest rates are down? All those kinds of things are there. But inflation not being emphasized by him, I think, was a well thought out issue.
A well thought out strategy, many would say. So I want to ask you this question. Everybody's talking about Mr. Modi, his growth agenda, his development model, and he has a proven track record in Gujarat. He's decisive, he's strong. Many people believe he perhaps will not be able to bring the consensus, but that's a political debate, one that we can do with politicians. I want to ask you, is India running the risk of overriding expectations on one man alone? He doesn't have a magic wand like, the flower said. Is that a risk we are running as well? Are we building too much into this expectation?
I think just the hype everywhere is that as if this is all discounted for the markets anyway running ahead of themselves.
Right.
To that extent, you can have disappointment. But the real economy, I think, is quite real. I don't think Indian businessmen are saying, I'm going to start investing tomorrow. Neither are foreigners rushing in and saying, I'm going to put in, long duration capital here. As Rajiv was saying, it takes time to change. There's no miracle there. I just look at simple things like land acquisition. It's been approved. Now, how are they going to go around even making it more friendly for the industry? It's going to take a long time. I mean, that itself,
have to come out with their own laws.
Even if they want to get it done, they will have party to approval. So how do you get this thing undone? Yeah. How do you get growth back without inflation? How do you do supply side debottlenecking? I think there's no miracle, but if your question is about markets, the markets can go where they want. But I think the real economy will have to come out of this in a much more gradual...
Is there exuberance in the market?
I don't know which markets. Look, I think bond markets are 8.8%. I've been a believer for a long time that they are still overvalued. Might hate me to say this. Yeah. I think rates are high. I think the fact of the matter is inflation is still high. And public markets are trading at 16 times earnings when you don't even have 10% net income growth here. So, I don't think they're irrational, but...
far more exuberant than you and I are.
They're definitely ahead of themselves.
Yeah, I want to react in a slightly different kind of way.
Right.
Because there are different layers in the Indian population and the Indian voter.
Right.
So far as the urban middle class is concerned, the educated lot, I think what they are looking for is someone who is a complete antithesis of everything Dr. Manmohan Singh stands for. Because there's a lot of disenchantment with Dr. Manmohan Singh. So, postage stamp, fine, that's what we want. But you're also looking at
to one word he says.
Yeah, we're also talking about a rural India. And I think what's happened there is a lot of people are missing a sense of pride. So they get upset. The Chinese are doing this, the Pakistanis are doing this. Now here is someone who for us, in some sense, is selling that notion of pride. So I think there are all of these different things that are fueling it, which is why the support, to the extent I can make it out to be, is more for Mr. Modi and less for the BJP.
And I think you have got the third front in the back of your mind. Is the fear around the third front unfounded, or is it over-exaggerated?
I think it's very unlikely that there'll be a third front.
If there was one.
The probability is very low. Oh, well, if there's a third front, we just postpone the good news till 2016 or 2017. But am I going to get my list of...
You get your list in just a while. Let's go to your list there. Yes.
My list... so I have a vision list, and then there can be a very narrow specific list.
Right.
But the vision list is clearly that, it's been 20 years of liberalization, but we still don't have a clear articulation of the role of the state vis-a-vis the private sector. Really what I'd want the next government to do is to have a very clear view of what the interaction of the state must be with the private sector. And that's code for a number of things. Dispute resolutions, cleaning up regulations, but really setting this right is critically important. Second, I would say the same thing for interactions with the state. We have to resuscitate, strengthen once again national institutions.
Fix Coal India and fix railways, that's the top of your list.
I don't add too much, but just saying on Coal India, I think fixing the coal in the power sector is critical. It'll debottleneck a lot of investment that has gone into the ground. And I would just say there are some very basic financial sector reforms that are just stuck. If you want to unleash the private savings, again, of long-term capital and not just depend upon foreign money, you've got to get the local capital in. So there are some very basic financial sector reforms that need to be done. That's it.
Your business.
No one asked. You did ask which were the laws under which the cops were coming to him to report about the balloons. That's the Indian Aircraft Act of 1934 and the Indian Aircraft Rules of 1935.
He quoted an older one. The First World War Act on
1934.
No, I said he quoted the First World War one on balloons.
Now the reason I'm mentioning this is number one on my list would actually be a cleaning up of all the
Second World War.
Item number two would be a rehabilitation of the PM and the Prime Minister's office, because that's the head of the cabinet and you can't have a system where we crack jokes about the PM all the time. Item number three, and I will defend it if in private, is I want the Planning Commission to be actually scrapped. It doesn't deserve to be there.
You don't even want them to be armchair economists.
No, they are not a constitutional organ. They are still executively.
So that's the word from economist experts in corporate India on Mr. Modi's speech. He has touched upon a whole host of issues. Inflation is something he steered clear away from, perhaps knowing fully well he doesn't have a magic wand to fix it just yet. But that's the issue that pertains to consumers like you and me. It's been a pleasure being with you.